Hello and welcome to the Seniorship podcast. Here at Seniorship, we are all about making the most out of later life, he says, adjusting his glasses so he can see what's going on. Anyway, I'm going to introduce a guest who I've got to know a little bit over the last year and who I'm confident has some really good ideas on how to help us make the most out of later life. And here on Seniorship, I'm going to admit him any second now because he's in the waiting room. How good is that? And his name is Tony Brett Young. So here he is. Tony, good morning. Can you hear me? Somebody said recently that Zoom is a bit like a seance, really. And it says, "Can you hear me?" And so, Tony, I can see you. I can't hear you yet.
You can't hear me yet.
I can. Now I can. Yes, I
Yes, you
can.
can. Yeah, because
Yep.
I'm not on mute.
Yeah,
I often make
exactly.
that mistake on Zoom calls of muting myself and not remembering to unmute.
Not road up, yeah, but the reverse is also a problem. If you're on a large Zoom call, as I was last month, with about 50 people on it, that people forgot to mute themselves when they weren't speaking. As a result, you got a lot of background noise. Anyway, that's by the by. More importantly, Tony, I know something about you, but our listeners, both of them, listeners and viewers, don't necessarily. So if I were to meet you for the first time and say, "Oh, Tony, nice to meet you. What do you do? What are you up to these days?"
What am I up to? Well, I'm retired now, Michael, after a lifetime in media, politics, um, public affairs, and by and large, a very enjoyable career, very satisfying and happy career, but often quite stressful. And quite honestly, I'm not a great person for coping with stress, as my wife will tell everybody. But by and large, a very enjoyable career. I started in Australia as a young journalist with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and worked with them, being posted to three different states. And I was with them for 8 years before I came to England, ostensibly for 2 years. Well, that
Yeah,
was 53 years ago,
for two
and I haven't
years.
been deported yet. But in England, I've worked mainly in public affairs and media still. Latterly, with the Australian High Commissioner's head of public affairs, that means being responsible for media, press, and cultural promotion. So I was the Les Patterson, I suppose, of the Australian High Commission.
Oh, a
But I
famous
hope I
name.
dress better than Les.
Well, you're certainly sober at the moment, but which is very unlike Les. But yeah, I want to talk to you late. You mentioned cultural issues, cultural life, and that's something later I want to talk to you about because you've introduced me to some resources and ideas that I wasn't aware of. And I I want to talk a little bit later in the conversation about how I met you. In other words, where you and I both live, and the and how that works out. But first of all, here on Seniorship, we say we're all about getting the most out of later life, and you can call it retirement or call it what you will. But in terms of getting the most out of later life, you come across as a guy who does that already very well. Would you be able to crystallize what you think are, in your experience, the main elements of getting the most out of later life?
I think, Michael, it's being involved, being active and staying active and involved. Both my wife, Cynthia, and I have always been people to get involved, particularly in our local community. We lived in London. Cynthia's originally from London. and we lived in southwest London for nearly 40 years before we came to Birmingham. Um, and we were very much involved in our community there, quite apart from our professions, our work, the work that we did, and bringing up family, of course. But no, Cynthia, for example, was very much involved with the local guides. She was a guide leader for many years, still is involved with Trefoil, which is guides for adults. And she did quite a lot of voluntary work. Um, I suppose I followed her example, trying to get involved in voluntary work as well. And I'm still uh, connected with some of the voluntary groups in London that we left behind, reluctantly, but we came to Birmingham for family reasons, for pressing family reasons, and have never regretted it. We now live in a wonderful retirement village, fairly central to Birmingham, and if you get the impression that a retirement village is for people who sit around and knit and sing wartime songs, that's totally the wrong way to look at it. We have here, for example, gym, swimming pool, bistro, restaurant. We show movies, for example, in the village lounge, and it's just getting involved, making sure that you be a part of the life of the community. We've got a ready-made community in our retirement village, and where we've got 120, 130 neighbours, you're bound to find people of similar interests and people that you want to chat with, talk to, share our lives with, really.
Yeah.
So we're very fortunate in as much that we found this place.
And you said get involved and stay involved, and no one does that more than you and Cynthia, because you mentioned, for example, that movies are shown here. You didn't, and that's very modest of you. Mention that you and Cynthia, between you, curate the movies, correct? So you are you are among you two are two of the biggest movers and shakers in this village. And I'm reminded of something that was said by Arnold Schwarzenegger in a documentary I watched about his life, and he was being persuaded to go into politics, and you're involved in politics, have been. He was being involved when he stood for governor of California. He'd never done anything like that before, but he remembered what had been said by his dad, with whom he never got on very well anyway, but he remembered what his dad said, which was be useful. And so that's another way of describing what you're saying here, involved in being. Now, London, you moved here from London how many years ago, Tony?
Now 7 years,
Okay.
2017, so 8 years almost. Will be 8 years in July. So a little while now. We've got to know Birmingham well, and we've got to love Birmingham as a great
Yes.
city with great history.
Oh, gosh, yes, absolutely. But you're still involved. For example, you've told me about your involvement with, political work in London, and 7, 8 years ago. But you have, in other words, have kept up those connections, haven't you, Tony?
Yes, I got involved in politics in a rather curious way. I blame Cynthia for this. She answered a knock on the door one day years ago, and it was a local councillor who was just door knocking to find out if we had any issues for the council. And Cynthia, I think, was at the time looking after our little baby and said, "Look, you better talk to Tony about this." And uh, the local council said, "Are you interested in local issues?" And I have always been interested in local issues. Um, Simple, basic issues. There's things that make communities work. I grew up in a little country town in the outback of Queensland in Australia, and sense of community there is huge. We had a population of 3,000 people, and everybody looked after everybody else. There was a
Mhm.
great sense of fellowship and well-being, and um, it can be, or can feel rather remote, but it's actually a very, very strong way of keeping keeping well. I think looking after one another. Well-being is a word we use a lot now, but I don't think we ever called it that in those days.
Yeah,
But it's very important.
yeah, absolutely. And you said connection. Now, talking to you before this conversation today, you told me that you know a small town in Queensland where one of my oldest friends was born and brought up. I think it's called Toowoomba, and how his dad ran the cheese factory there, and I'd certainly never heard of the place, and I've heard it's a very small place, but you knew exactly where it was, and
Oh,
so
indeed. And in fact, I
yeah,
worked there with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation.
yeah,
Uh, when I was a young reporter, we were posted to remote parts of the country to quite often relieve the regional journalists who were going on holidays or were ill or whatever. And we took the opportunity to fill in for a time. Uh, the attraction for us young people was we were handsomely paid. We were given a bonus for doing that sort of thing.
yeah, yeah.
And Toowoomba was one of those places I went to and spent some time in. It's a place about 120 kilometres to the west of Brisbane, not far out, but right up on the mountain range. So it attracts the breezes, and it's quite cool in at times when the rest of Queensland can be very, very hot. So it's attractive to a lot of retired people, particularly people from the outback, from the bush, who decided to move closer to facilities of the bigger cities. And Toowoomba has a population of about 120,000, so it's not a small town, but
Okay.
a very pretty place as well.
Okay, connection and you said Toowoomba would attract retired people, and you mentioned the fact that you and I live in a retirement village. Like you, I moved here from somewhere else where I was in my case Bristol, in your case London, where I was very happy, very active, very involved, big friend circle. But like you, for family reasons, to be closer to immediate family, in my case, a daughter and son-in-law and a grandson and and I found, luckily, this retirement village. You've said a little bit already about the appeal for people like you and me of a retirement village compared with independent living. And now you've mentioned the involvement, the sense of community. What else could you say about that?
Well, I mean, the community is, as I said, a ready-made one. I mean, when we came here, it was, sorry, that's a low voice off stage. This is another of the attractions of retirement. We've got a little dog. Can I just let him out? I'll be
Of
half.
course, of course, of course.
Go on, off you go.
Now, I mentioned in connection that Tony knew this town, Toowoomba, where one of my oldest friends was born and brought up, and also somebody else here in this village. He sadly died very recently, but I discovered that he was born and brought up in Bristol, where I've spent the last 20 years. And when we got talking, and he said, "Oh, what part of Bristol did you live?" And I said, "Clifton." He said, "Whereabouts in Clifton?" And I said, "Oh, well, Clifton Park Road." And he said, "I was born there." So, time and time again, I discover, as no doubt you have, that if you actually take the trouble to talk to people, then you find connections which you didn't know were there. Tony, I said you curate the movies here. You also organise the walks here, and is that something else that's worth talking about? If you like, the staying active physically as well as mentally.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, uh, Cynthia and I have always walked. We have been on many hiking holidays together over the years, camping, but hiking as well, both here in Britain and also on the continent. Uh, and it's been a very important part of our lives. And we are looking forward to a holiday in the Isle of Wight in, I think, September, um, hiking. So we still do that in our 80s. And well, since he's not quite 80 yet, I do her an injustice. But we still enjoy hiking. Birmingham is an amazing place. It's said to have more parks and gardens than almost any other city in Europe. Who
Mhm.
knew?
Who knew?
But some of the great benefactors, some of the great industrialists, left to the people of Birmingham large areas of open space. Cannon Hill Park, for example.
Yep.
The Cadburys left Waisley Hills Country Park. These are fabulous places for walking, and we're able through our retirement village to travel to those places. We have the use of a minibus, so it takes us to the place where we want to walk. So we've got a range of walks. Sutton Park is another one.
Oh, yes.
An amazing area of land. Again, one of the largest areas of open space in a city in Europe. And
Wow.
so we make very, very good use of those. And in doing so, we are very keen to share that with others of our village. We've developed quite a nice little community of walkers, of hikers, and we encourage everybody who wants to join us. Very sociable, but also healthy way of a healthy activity.
Very sociable. And now that's something I wanted to pick up on. My son-in-law, who's really interested in, well, actually, he's not only interested in how we live here, but also he found this place. When I said I'm going to move up here to Birmingham to be closer to Caroline, his wife, and my daughter, and uh, he said, right, I'll find you somewhere to live. You don't know Birmingham at all. I'll find you somewhere to live. And within 24 hours, he said, right, I've got 4 viewings arranged for tomorrow morning. Um, and the first place he brought me was this. So, in other words, he has an interest in this because he found the place. And I walked in and thought, well, you know what? This doesn't feel like a retirement village. In fact, he didn't say it was a retirement village. I walked in cold and I thought, well, it feels like a small hotel, actually.
Mm.
And in fact, one of my younger daughter said to me after a couple of drinks in the bar here, she said, Dad, this is not a retirement village. This is more like a small hotel with a youth club attached. Lots of activities, not compulsory. But anyway, my son-in-law asked me a question. He said, how many do you reckon of the, say, you mentioned 120, 130 people who live here? How many of those do you think avail themselves of the various activities going on? And I said, I don't know, 30% perhaps, I don't know, maybe 40%. There are many that I never see actually. And so he said, quite naturally, so is anything done to try and involve them in all these activities, which are numerous really? And I said, I don't really know. I'm going to find out. And I believe you, or maybe somebody has told me that in the past we did have a sort of like a befriending scheme here, whereby new residents somebody would go along and go and chat to them and have coffee with them, tell them about things. But the reason I bring this up actually is that not everybody wants to be as sociable as you or I might want to be. Yeah, we all
No,
will.
I'm
Yeah.
sure that's true. But having said that, I mean, you don't have to get involved in an activity. You don't have to play Scrabble. You don't have to go on hikes or walks. But we have lovely gardens here,
Yes.
and quite often you just meet people in the garden and chat with people in the garden, and that's part of being, a part of the society, the community we live in. During COVID, we were very, very fortunate because we were able to get out into the garden. That was not breaking any rules, and you could talk to somebody given the right distance. Um,
Mm.
and we were able to do that and did that quite a lot. And it, it is essential that people communicate. And there may be people who are unable to get out at all.
Mm.
Uh, but the other great benefit of this place is that there is a care um, a care group or care organization as part of the retirement village.
Yeah,
And if you need that support, you can
it's available.
call on it.
Yeah,
They do offer just the opportunity to get out with a carer for a walk if you wanted it. I mean, there's such a range of opportunities and things on offer
yes,
that there's really no reason why somebody shouldn't have connection and contact with others.
good,
Um, um, but the other thing I think it's important to underline is the fact that this is a place for people aged 55 plus.
yeah.
So you don't have to be 80 or 90 or
No, no,
whatever.
no, no, no.
And a lot of the people who do live here are, in fact, quite young
Indeed.
uh, and supportive of the older people. I used to read to a lovely blind lady who was well into her 90s, and we had um, weekly sessions reading, and I would read to her poems and passages from books that we both enjoyed. And latterly, I started to read to her a book which fascinated us both. And every week she would look forward to this, and I would look forward to it. And we'd spend half an hour chatting and gossiping, and then actually start reading the book. Um, so while she wasn't able to get out and do a great deal because of her lack of vision,
Mobility. Yeah, yeah.
uh, we did have a very very good relationship and a satisfying for us both, I think. And those sorts of relationships can develop uh,
Yes.
in a place like this.
Yeah. And you've reminded me, Tony, that you told me about a radio program you used to love called, if I'm not wrong, With Great Pleasure.
With great pleasure. BBC program, and people would be invited to share their favorite passages of literature, of some of the great works of literature, poems, readings of all sorts, speeches.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and it was a lovely idea, and I think it would be great if we could start one here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Seniorship, and you're still listening to Seniorship podcast, and you maybe have heard the start of yet another new activity at our orderly retirement village here in Birmingham. And you said we're fairly central here. Well, I would say we're what, 2 miles from the city centre, if maybe less. I don't know, something like that.
Oh gosh, a tram ride away, Michael, a tram ride or a bus ride away.
A
Or
track.
as
Thank
we
you.
often do, we often walk into town, and it's so convenient for us.
Yes.
Um, that was one of the great attractions. It meant that, in fact, we were finding we needed our car less and less, so we got rid of it, and now we rely pretty well much on public transport.
Transport and walking, as do I, as do I. And you said a tram ride because Birmingham has that priceless thing. It has a tram, only one line at the moment, but it's a start. By British standards, that's high praise.
When we lived in London, we had access to what were called the Freedom Pass,
Yes,
which was free travel for older people, 65s plus, I think it was. Um, we called ourselves not pensioners or old timers or things like that. We
good.
called ourselves freedom travelers, and
Ah, I like
I
it.
like to think of myself as a freedom traveler still.
Freedom travel. I'm going to write that down, Tony, because it's so good. Uh, but and hopefully you're allowed to be a freedom traveler even if you're not in London. Except that in London you'll do it free. Well, here in Birmingham, over a certain age, and maybe it's 65, we get the West Midlands Travel Pass,
That's
which
right.
takes us all around the West Midlands area on buses and the tram and
Yes.
local trains as well. Yeah, so that we can
I
go fair
often say
distance.
you could take the tram all the way to Wolverhampton. So
Yes.
there's an offer.
There's an offer, and there was something I wanted to say. Yes, listen, one of the downsides of getting older is keeping your memory active, and occasionally I will start a sentence and think to myself, hang on, where was I going with this? Why did I bring this up? But it was to do with freedom travel. Oh yes, I know what it is. Yeah, Birmingham has this priceless asset which Bristol, where I lived before, didn't have. It had many wonderful things, but it didn't have a professional concert hall, what I would call. It had St George's Brandon Hill, as it used to be called. It's now just called St George's, which is a very good concert hall, but it didn't have what we have in Birmingham, the Symphony Hall. So on Thursday of this week, I'll be going to a concert there, and it's priceless. Yeah, jump on the tram, and it's a 5 minute journey. That's what.
It's
Anyway,
the most wonderful facility.
yeah,
It's a legacy of Sir Simon Rattle, who insisted
yes.
on the building of this fabulous concert hall, based very much on the Boston Symphony Hall, but with better seating. In
Ah,
fact, they often say that the seating in Boston Symphony Hall is very uncomfortable, but they can't change it because it would change the acoustics quite
ah,
considerably.
okay.
So Birmingham Symphony Hall is just the most wonderful facility.
Well, you've reminded me. Yeah, you said earlier in the conversation that we have a gym here, and on the rare occasions when I go to the gym, I'll watch TV on the screen on the treadmill, and I know that if I go down there early in the morning, say 6:20, then they'll show old episodes of Cheers. And I don't know if you remember the program, set in a bar
Oh,
in
very well.
Boston, and I used to love that program and still do. And
Where everybody knows your name, Michael.
well, thank you. Well remembered. What a great theme tune, and
It was.
what a great sentiment that song had. Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, isn't it?
absolutely.
Isn't it good? And so, but I've never been to Boston. I've been to most parts of America, of the US, but not to Boston. And I wanted to go to Boston, but now I know we have one up on Boston. We have a symphony hall with more comfortable seats, and I'm pleased to know that actually. But yeah, so Symphony Hall. What else did I want to say? Oh, Les Patterson. You mentioned Les Patterson. So you are the Les Patterson of Audley Retirement Village. And for anybody who doesn't know, Les Patterson was uh, one of the many inventions or several inventions of Barry Humphries, your
Barry
countryman.
Humphries. Yes.
Yes. What a genius that man was. And Les Patterson, ladies and gentlemen, was he was described as the Australian cultural attaché. And yeah, it wasn't too serious. And Les Patterson was always drunk, I seem to remember, very dishevelled, unlike you, Tony. I'm looking here for a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on. Um, oh, yeah, one is uh, I mentioned briefly that you're still involved with your local political party in London, where you lived before. So you're clearly someone who is good at keeping in touch with people.
Well, I have to say that the connection I have is with what's called a pupil referral unit. And it's a place for young people who don't fit in particularly well in mainstream schools,
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And quite often, the reason involves domestic violence at home, which is a tragic state of affairs for young people growing up in an environment like
Oh,
that.
yes.
So quite often they'll react when they get to mainstream school, and they find that there's a better place for them at a pupil referral unit. And we have one in the London Borough of Sutton, which was the borough where we lived for many, many years, which is outstanding. And I was very much involved 15 years ago in helping to rebuild by diverting some money from the government towards that project. Because I always maintained that if you were going to tell young people that they weren't worth anything, offer them poor accommodation, poor facilities. So I was determined that we should upgrade the facilities for the PRU, and we did, and spent quite a lot of money on upgrading it. The result was one, we appointed a very, very good head, but the result also was that the grading of the school went from, um, I think, the third lowest level in Ofsted to outstanding. And having had that involvement with it and felt and seeing the benefit to young people of having that sort of opportunity when they'd had been served, you know, uh, poor opportunities in life. When they had that opportunity, the benefits that it provided for them, and I was determined to keep in touch and involved. So I'm now what's called a member. A member is a rather strange creation. Now that we have academies, the school that I was involved with, the college I was involved with, is a part of a larger academy.
Hmm.
Uh, and they're looked after by trustees. Who looks after the trustees? Who keeps an eye on the trustees? Members. So
Yeah.
I'm what is called curiously a member of the trust. So
Okay.
I chair the members group. So we appoint trustees. We keep an eye on them, making sure that they're doing the right thing by their trust, and it's quite rewarding. It doesn't involve a huge amount of time, but involves keeping in touch, keeping an eye on things, and that's what I like to do.
Yeah. That sounds excellent. I'm glad you mentioned this. I've made a note of that because yes, I'm having lunch soon with a dear friend of mine who has worked all her life basically in domestic violence or domestic abuse, call it what you will, issues, a tragic thing. And yes, that's an angle to it that I wasn't aware of. These pupil referral units. That's really sounds excellent. And Sutton sounds like a very good place. I mean, not as good as Edgbaston here in Birmingham, but a good place.
But about equal, Michael, about equal.
Good, good, good. Because you know what they say? I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, comparison is the thief of joy.
We lived at a place, a part of Sutton called Cheam, and
Oh,
Cheam may be a name familiar to you,
very familiar.
because that, of course, where the great Birmingham comedian Tony Hancock based his East Cheam. Um,
Yes, yes,
it
yes.
wasn't a place called East Cheam,
No, there
although I
wasn't.
discovered now that there is a constituency, a ward within the borough, which is called East Cheam, and I think it's been named in honour of the connection with Tony Hancock.
Well, what talk about a cultural icon, and he absolutely was. And I remember an interview with one of the Rolling Stones years ago, and he said, you know what? He said, we were all Hancock fans. And so if we were rehearsing the day after Hancock's half hour had been on the radio or television, because it was radio first, wasn't it?
Oh yes,
Before television, and in some ways better. Anyway, he said if we were rehearsing the day after, we'd be quoting Hancock lines to each other, and everybody would know exactly what the response was.
yes.
All this, and he said all these years later, because Hancock was 1970s or even 60s, I think. He said, now, even today in 2020 or wherever it was when I heard this interview, he said, my wife if I quote a Hancock line to her, she'll come back with the exact right response. Yeah, yeah. Isn't that
A
great?
pint, a pint. That's a whole armful.
Yeah, exactly. I knew you would say that exactly. And one of my jobs, I worked at one time for the Stroke Association. I would go around talking to Rotary clubs, WIs, and anybody who raised money for us or did anything for us. And I'd go around and give talks and say, "You're all wonderful, and this is what we do." And quite often I would preface it by saying, "Listen, and I would have to talk about risk factors for stroke, which, after all, let's face it, as we get older, are things we have to take seriously." And I would say, risk factors for stroke are the following. And I must preface this by saying, I'm not a doctor. I said, I come from the Tony Hancock School of Medicine. And of course, that always get a laugh. And they would expect me to say, um, something about an armful. But no, I would always say, you may remember in the blood donor episode, he was pontificating about something or other, and a chap there said, "You're very knowledgeable. Are you a doctor?" And Hancock said, "No, I never bothered." I never bothered. Anyway, I digress. Tony, I'm going to do connections, sense of community, movies, and yeah, being useful. You are, I would say, a role model for the Arnold Schwarzenegger system. I mean, I don't think you've ever been a bodybuilder, but be useful. That was his mantra, and I reckon it's clearly yours. You live it. Uh, Tony, would you be prepared to come back again on the podcast and talk again, develop some of these things more?
Of course, yes, I do that with great pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And you know what? One of my friends, one of our friends here in this retirement village, was talking to me about the blue zones. And now I think you know something about these blue zones, the areas on the planet where people live unexpectedly long lives, and where there are well above average numbers of centenarians, if that's the right word. And she said there have been massive studies, multifactorial research studies and all the rest of it to discover what are the factors, the predictors of long life. And she said, unanimously above exercise, diet, um, alcohol, smoking, all that, above all of them was social contact. And I think a lot of the things you've talked about, Tony, today have been all about that, really, social contact and being involved and being useful. So, Tony Brett Young, thank you ever so much for coming on the podcast, and I will hold you to your promise that you would come on again.
That would be my pleasure, Michael, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, and bye for now, everyone. Thank you for listening.